Chapter 43, Truth Revealed. The helicopter blades screamed, a rhythmic, mechanical throb that felt like it was trying to split my skull open. Below us, the jagged white teeth of the Alps blurred into a sea of gray and blue as we tore through the thin mountain air. I stared at the tablet in my lap. The looped security footage from the Herslinden Clinic was only 10 seconds long, but I had watched it 100 times. My father, Arthur Sterling. He wasn't being dragged. He wasn't being coerced. He was walking with a steady, purposeful stride that defied 3 years of atrophy. His eyes, even through the grainy digital feed, were sharp, filled with a terrifying, familiar brilliance. Beside him, Eleanor Blackwood looked like a queen reclaiming her general. "They're heading for the border," Alexander said, his voice cutting through the headset. He was hunched over a secondary monitor, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "My mother has a private airstrip in the Rhine Valley. If they make it to the jet, we lose them." "He walked out, Alexander," I whispered, the words tasting like poison. "He didn't just wake up, he was waiting." Alexander looked at me, and for a second the pilot's controls seemed to wobble. His face was a mask of cold, agonizing clarity. "The fallout isn't what we thought, Maya. It's not about the theft, it's about the pact." "What pact?" "We're about to find out." The helicopter banked hard, diving toward a hidden estate nestled in a valley that shouldn't have existed on any map. Le Château d'Amber. The Shadow Castle, a Blackwood property so private even the steward hadn't been allowed to visit. As we touched down on the stone pad, the wind whipped my hair into a frenzy. Alexander jumped out first, reaching back to grab my hand. He didn't have a weapon this time. He didn't need one. He was the weapon. "Stay behind me," he commanded. "No," I said, pulling him level with me. "This is my father, my legacy. I'm not hiding anymore, Alexander, not even behind you." We walked toward the heavy oak doors. They swung open before we could touch them. The interior was a jarring contrast of medieval stone and hypermodern technology. Shimmering holographic displays floated in the foyer, projecting the global data from the Horizon launch. My code, my mapping. It was everywhere, pulsing like a living heart. And standing in the center of the room, holding a glass of dark red wine, was my father. He looked younger. The gray in his hair seemed distinguished rather than frail. He was wearing a tailored suit that made him look like a mirror image of Alexander. "Maya," he said, his voice a rich, resonant baritone. "You always were the fastest at decoding the backdoors. I expected you 20 minutes ago." Alexander POV. I looked at Arthur Sterling, then at the woman who stepped out from the shadows of the grand staircase. My mother. Eleanor was smiling. It wasn't the triumphant smirk of a corporate raider. It was the satisfied look of an architect whose building had finally been topped off. "Welcome to the room, Alexander," she said, her voice like silk over a blade. "I believe you've met the third partner." "He's not the third partner," I hissed, my hand tightening on Maya's. I could feel her shaking, a fine, high-frequency vibration of shock and rage. Eris Thorne said. "Eris Thorne was a convenient idiot," Arthur Sterling interrupted, stepping toward us. He didn't look at me. He looked at Maya with a pride that made my stomach churn. "He was a bitter man who couldn't see the forest for the trees. He thought I was the victim. He thought Arthur Blackwood was the thief. He never realized that the theft was the only way to protect the sovereign protocol." "The Icarus Protocol," Maya corrected, her voice trembling. "Alexander took the fall for it. He went to a cell for you." "And he did it beautifully," Arthur said, nodding toward me. "A true Blackwood, sacrifice the peace to save the board. But the protocol wasn't a weapon, Maya. It was a filter. We needed the world to think the science was stolen so the governments would stay away while we perfected the bridge. I demanded. You and my father, you and Eleanor. All of us, Eleanor said, walking to stand beside Arthur Sterling. They looked like a power couple, the true masters of the room. Your father and Maya's father realized 30 years ago that the human mind was too valuable to be left to the public. They built the Blackwood Empire to fund the research and the Sterling Trust to hide it. The locked-in contract. That wasn't my idea, Alexander. It was a template Arthur Sterling wrote in 1994. The room tilted. I looked at Maya. She was staring at her father as if he were a stranger. Her face was deathly pale, her eyes wide with a soul-crushing betrayal. You wrote it, Maya whispered. You wrote the clause that Alexander used to cage me. I wrote it to ensure you would always be the one in control, Maya, her father said, his voice softening. I knew that if I died, you would be financially cornered. I knew the Blackwood machine would move in. I wrote the contract so that whoever held it, Alexander, would be forced to bring you into the center of the empire. I didn't cage you. I gave you the throne. You used me, Maya cried out, a jagged, raw sound of pain. You used my grief. You used my love for you to manipulate Alexander into buying my life. It was a merger of blood, Maya, Eleanor said. The Blackwoods have the power, the Sterlings have the mind. Together, through the two of you, the sovereign protocol is finally live. You didn't just cross the line in Zurich, you fulfilled the pact. I felt a surge of rage so intense it bypassed logic. These people, these relics of a past built on shadows, hadn't just stolen companies. They had stolen our choices. They had engineered our collision, our desire, and our very surrender. They had turned our love into a corporate milestone. Maya POV. I looked at the gold ring on my finger, the symbol of my freedom. The symbol of the man who had stood in the rain and given everything away. Is it true? I asked, looking at Alexander. Did you know? Alexander turned to me. His eyes were raw, filled with a devastation that matched my own. No, I swear to you, Maya, I thought I was the villain. I thought I was the one who broke the rules. I didn't know I was just following a script. He didn't know, my father said, swirling his wine. That was the beauty of it. A Blackwood only works at his peak when he thinks he's conquering. A Sterling only creates when she thinks she's surviving. The friction between you was the energy the algorithm needed to bridge the fourth factor. I walked toward my father, my heels clicking like gunfire on the stone floor. I stopped inches from him. He smelled of the same expensive cologne Alexander used, the scent of power. You're a monster, I whispered. I'm a visionary, Maya, and you're my successor. He reached out to touch my face, but I slapped his hand away. I am nothing to you, I said, my voice cold and hard as a diamond. You let me watch you wither in that bed. You let me spend every cent I had on your medical bills. You let me sign my life away to a man I thought was my enemy, all for a sovereign protocol. The protocol is immortality, Maya. We've mapped the consciousness of the elite. We own the future of memory. You own a pile of ashes. Alexander's voice boomed from behind me. I turned. Alexander was standing by the holographic terminal. He had pulled a small, silver device from his pocket, the master override from the Icarus vault. The sovereign protocol requires a live link to the Blackwood Sterling mainframes, Alexander said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. Mainframes that I moved to a blind server in the Hamptons before we left for Zurich. Eleanor's face went pale. Alexander, don't be a fool. That data is worth trillions. The data is a crime, Alexander said, his eyes fixed on his mother. And I'm the one who's going to report it. You'll destroy yourself, she shouted. You'll go to prison for real this time. I don't care, Alexander said. He looked at me, and in that moment the truth revealed wasn't about our parents. It was about us. He was telling me that he was willing to burn his life again, truly this time, to prove that our love wasn't a pact, to prove that we were the ones who owned the room. Do it, I whispered. Alexander POV. I hit the sequence. The holographic displays in the room began to flicker. The blue lines of the neural maps turned red, then dissolved into static. The sovereign protocol, the lifework of 2 generations of monsters, was being overwritten by a simple, elegant string of code Maya had written in the notebook, the truth code. No. Arthur Sterling lunged for the terminal, but I stepped in his way. I didn't hit him. I didn't have to. I just stood there, a wall of charcoal wool and cold resolve. It's over, Arthur, I said. The room is empty. My mother slumped against the staircase, her regal mask finally shattering. She looked at me with a mixture of horror and a twisted, lingering respect. You really are your father's son, she whispered. You'd rather own nothing than share the throne. I'm not my father's son, I said, reaching for Maya's hand. I'm the man who loves Maya Sterling, and she doesn't share her throne with anyone. The servers in the basement of the chateau let out a high-pitched whine, then a muffled explosion. The lights in the grand hall flickered and died, leaving us in the dim, natural light of the Swiss afternoon. The pact was broken. The legacy was dead. I looked at Arthur Sterling. He looked old again. The miraculous recovery had been fueled by the adrenaline of his own ego, and now that the ego was starving, he looked like a man who was ready to return to the dark. Maya, he rasped, reaching out a shaking hand. Maya didn't move. She stood beside me, her chin high, her eyes dry. She looked at the man who had raised her, the man who had used her as a technical advisor for his own immortality, and she gave him the only thing he had left. Silence. She turned her back on him and walked toward the door. I followed her. Maya POV. We walked out of the shadow castle and into the blinding light of the valley. The helicopter was still waiting, its rotors slowing to a stop. The pilot looked at us with confusion, but we ignored him. We walked to the edge of the stone pad and looked out at the mountains. I felt hollow. Every memory of my childhood, every moment of love from my father felt like a lie. I had been a project to him, a variable to be solved. I looked at Alexander. He was staring at the horizon, his jaw set, his breathing heavy. They built us for each other, I whispered. They tried, Alexander said, turning to look at me. He took my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the tears that were finally starting to fall. They engineered the meeting. They wrote the contract. They created the crisis. But they didn't create this, Maya. He kissed me, a slow, deep, and rawly honest kiss that tasted of salt and the end of the world. They didn't create the way you look at me when the lights go out, he murmured against my lips. And they didn't create the fact that I would rather be a bankrupt ghost in a cell than spend a single second without you. We're alone now, Alexander, I said, clinging to his blazer. We have no name, no company, no history. We're just us. Good, he said, pulling me closer. I've been wanting to meet just us for a long time. The fallout of Act III was complete. The truth had been revealed, and it had burned everything we thought we knew to the ground. But as we stood on the edge of that Swiss valley, I realized that the fire hadn't destroyed us. It had just cleared the way. We were locked in to a reality where our parents were ghosts and our future was a blank page. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the silence. Alexander POV, midnight, Zurich. We returned to the hotel suite one last time. The press were gone. The explosion story had been replaced by a massive technical glitch report issued by the Swiss authorities. My mother and Arthur Sterling had vanished into the shadows of the chateau, likely to spend the rest of their lives in legal battles that would never reach the front pages. I sat on the bed, watching Maya pack a single small bag. We weren't taking the luxury suitcases. We weren't taking the suits. We were taking the clothes we had bought in the village. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Not New York," she said, looking at me, "and not the Hamptons. The research center in Zurich." "No, we're going to find a place where the air doesn't smell like Blackwood money." She walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, her hand finding mine. "Alexander, I'm going to use the last of the Sterling Trust to fund the public release of the mapping code. The real code. The one that heals. No Icarus. No sovereign. No locked in." "You'll be giving away billions," I noted. "I'll be giving back the future," she said. "Are you in?" I looked at the woman I loved, the CEO who was about to dismantle her own empire, the scientist who was about to set the world free. "I've always been in, Maya," I said, pulling her into my arms. We stayed like that for a long time, listening to the clockwork city of Zurich. The fallout was over. The truth was revealed. The claim was next, but as I closed my eyes, I realized that I had already claimed everything I ever wanted. I had her, and she had me. And in the end, that was the only room that mattered. Maya POV. I woke up to the sound of the wind. Alexander was standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. He looked like the man I had first met, the ruthless billionaire. But as he heard me move, he turned. The expression on his face was one of absolute, unshielded peace. "It's time, Maya," he said softly. "Time for what?" "Time to leave the room." We walked out of the hotel suite, hand in hand. We didn't take the elevator, we took the stairs. We walked through the lobby and out into the cold Swiss night. We didn't call a car. We just started walking. The truth was revealed. The fire was out. The world was waiting. And for the first time, we were the ones who were going to tell it what to do, together. Next chapter, Chapter 44, The Threat Returns.